There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than any argument ever could. It happens when you stop explaining yourself, stop reaching out, stop asking to be understood, and simply step away. Not to punish anyone, not to make someone chase you, but because something inside you finally says, I have given enough. And suddenly, the person who became comfortable with your presence is confronted with your absence. They begin to notice the messages that no longer arrive, the attention that is no longer available, the energy that once surrounded them but is now somewhere else. Your silence creates a space they cannot easily fill. And here is what makes your disappearance powerful. You do not have to announce it. You do not have to tell the world that you are walking away. You simply become quieter, wiser, and more focused on your own life. The people who once assumed you would always be there may begin to wonder where you went, why you changed, and what finally made you stop accepting what you once tolerated. They may search for answers in your silence, but the truth is much simpler. You stopped abandoning yourself just to remain available to someone else. Sometimes, people do not understand your value while they have constant access to you. They understand it when your presence becomes a memory. They remember your kindness. They remember your patience. They remember how often you showed up when nobody asked you to. And when that presence disappears, they are left alone with the realization that what they thought was ordinary was actually something rare. So if you have ever wondered what happens when you quietly remove yourself from someone's life, listen closely, because your absence can reveal things your presence never could. It can expose attachment, awaken curiosity, trigger reflection, and sometimes even create regret. But most importantly, it can reveal something about you, that you are capable of choosing peace over pursuit, dignity over desperation, and your own growth over the need to be noticed. And once you learn to walk away without hatred, without revenge, and without looking back for applause, you discover a freedom that no person's attention can ever give you. There is something powerful about absence, because absence has a language of its own. When you were always there, your presence may have seemed ordinary to them. They knew you would answer. They knew you would listen. They knew that if they needed encouragement, comfort, attention, or simply someone who cared, you would probably be there. And because you gave so freely, they may never have stopped to consider what your presence actually meant. But the moment you become quiet, something changes. The familiar becomes missing, and the missing becomes noticeable. They begin to feel the difference in the smallest moments. A conversation happens, and they instinctively expect your voice. A difficult day arrives, and they remember how you used to make things feel lighter. They reach for the attention they once received from you and discover that it is no longer there. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply an uncomfortable realization that someone who was once consistently available has become unavailable. And in that quiet realization, they finally begin to understand the space you occupied in their life. But remember this. Disappearing should never be about trying to make someone suffer. Your silence is not supposed to be a weapon. Your distance is not supposed to be a performance. If you walk away only to watch whether they come running after you, then you are still allowing their reaction to control your peace. True distance begins when you stop asking, will they notice me? And start asking, what happens to me when I finally choose myself? There are people who become comfortable with your presence because you make their lives easier. They become accustomed to your patience, your forgiveness, your willingness to understand, and your habit of giving second chances. They may not have intended to take you for granted, but comfort can make people careless. Sometimes they do not recognize the blessing while they are holding it. It is only when your hands are no longer reaching toward them that they realize how much you once gave. Your absence can also become a mirror. Without your constant reassurance, they may have to face their own behavior. Without you explaining every misunderstanding, they may have to sit with questions they once ignored. without you returning after every disappointment. They may finally wonder whether they pushed too far. You do not need to explain every lesson. Sometimes life teaches more clearly through silence than words ever could. And while they are noticing your absence, you should be learning to appreciate your own presence. Fill the space you once gave to chasing people with building yourself. Put that energy into your dreams, your character, your health, your peace, and the life you kept postponing while trying to be important to someone else. Let your disappearance from their world become your reappearance in your own. Because the greatest victory is not when they finally miss you. The greatest victory is when you no longer need them to. You reach a place where their recognition is no longer required for you to know your worth. You can be remembered without returning, loved without chasing, and missed without feeling responsible for coming back. And that is when your absence becomes something beautiful, not because someone else feels the loss, but because you finally discovered the value of your own presence. At first, they may not notice the silence. They may assume you are busy, distracted, or simply having a quiet day. After all, you have always been there before. They have seen you return after disappointment, reach out after distance, and explain yourself when something went wrong. So when you suddenly stop doing all of that, they may think it is temporary. But as the days pass, the silence begins to feel different. They start asking themselves a question they never expected to ask. What changed? And that question can become surprisingly loud. They may replay old conversations in their mind, remembering moments they once dismissed. They may think about the way you used to respond, the way you used to care, and the way you always found a reason to keep the connection alive. Now there is nothing, no long explanation, no emotional announcement, no attempt to convince them that you still care, just silence. And sometimes, silence leaves a person with more questions than 1,000 words ever could. They may wonder if they said something that crossed a line. They may wonder whether you finally became tired of giving more than you received. They may wonder whether you met new people, found a new direction, or simply discovered something about yourself that changed the way you see the relationship. But the truth is, you do not owe everyone an explanation for every change you make in your life. There are moments when explaining yourself again and again only keeps you trapped inside the same cycle. People often become comfortable with the version of you they know. They know what makes you react. They know what makes you forgive. They know how long you will tolerate distance before reaching out. They know that if they wait long enough, you may come back and restore everything to the way it was. But when you stop following the old pattern, you become unfamiliar to them. Not because you became cruel, but because you became conscious. Your silence tells them that something inside you has shifted. Maybe you realized that constantly proving your loyalty was exhausting. Maybe you realized that being available to everyone was leaving you unavailable to yourself. Maybe you finally understood that peace does not require everyone to understand your decisions. Whatever the reason, the change becomes visible without you having to announce it. And this is where you must be careful. When people notice your absence, some may suddenly return. They may ask what happened. They may become more attentive. They may even act as though they suddenly understand your value. Do not let curiosity alone convince you to return to a place that repeatedly disturbed your peace. Listen to actions, not temporary reactions. Your goal was never to make them wonder. Your goal was to stop living in a way that required their constant attention. If they wonder what changed, let the answer be simple. You changed. You grew. You learned. You became more protective of your time, your heart, and your future. You stopped explaining every boundary and started living by it. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about walking away. You do not need to create a dramatic ending. You do not need the final word. Sometimes you simply become quieter, move forward, and allow people to discover for themselves that the person they once knew is no longer willing to lose themselves just to remain in someone else's life. There are some things people only recognize after they are no longer receiving them. A warm presence, a listening ear, a patient heart, a person who stayed through difficult conversations, forgave mistakes, offered encouragement, and kept showing up even when they were not always treated with the same care. When you are constantly available, people can begin to mistake your consistency for something permanent. They stop seeing it as a gift because it has become familiar. But when you quietly step away, familiarity disappears, and suddenly the value of what they had becomes much clearer. They may begin remembering all the little things you did that once seemed insignificant. The message you sent when they were having a difficult day. The way you noticed when something was wrong, even when they said they were fine. The patience you showed when they were difficult. The chances you gave when another person might have walked away. At the time, those things may have felt ordinary to them because they were happening repeatedly. But now that those moments are gone, they may realize that ordinary was never the right word. What they considered ordinary was actually your effort. Sometimes people do not understand how much emotional energy another person gives until that energy is no longer available. They become accustomed to being heard without realizing how rare it is to find someone who genuinely listens. They become accustomed to being forgiven without realizing how much strength forgiveness can require. They become accustomed to your presence without realizing that you were choosing to be there every single time. And then one day, you stop choosing it. Not because you suddenly stopped caring, but because you finally understood that caring for someone should not require abandoning yourself. There is a difference between loving someone and continuously accepting behavior that hurts you. There is a difference between being patient and allowing yourself to be repeatedly disrespected. There is a difference between giving someone another chance and giving away pieces of yourself just to keep a connection alive. Your absence can reveal that difference. They may look back and realize that they had someone who genuinely wanted the best for them, someone who celebrated their victories without jealousy, someone who offered support without keeping score, someone who believed in them during moments when they struggled to believe in themselves. And perhaps the hardest realization is understanding that they did not lose you because you suddenly became different. They lost access to you because they repeatedly failed to appreciate what was already in front of them. But do not wait for that realization. Do not live your life hoping that one day someone will finally say, "I should have valued you more." Your worth does not increase when somebody recognizes it. Your value was never dependent on their ability to see it. You were valuable when they appreciated you, and you were valuable when they overlooked you. You were valuable when they stayed, and you remained valuable when they walked away. Sometimes distance is necessary because it allows both people to see clearly. When you are constantly present, emotions can blur judgment. But when you step back, the noise becomes quieter. You can see what was healthy, what was one-sided, what was genuine, and what you were holding together by yourself. And they may see it too. So if someone takes you for granted, do not beg them to appreciate you. Do not compete for their attention. Do not become louder just to prove that you matter. Simply become more intentional with where you place your energy. Let your absence teach the lesson that your words could not. And if they eventually understand what they lost, let that be their realization, not your responsibility. Because sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is not demanding to be valued. It is quietly leaving the places where you have to beg for your value to be recognized. Attention is one of the quietest forms of affection, and people often do not recognize its value until it is gone. When you consistently listen, respond, encourage, check in, and make someone feel seen, your attention becomes part of their emotional landscape. They begin to expect it. They may not even realize how much comfort they receive from knowing that you are there. But when you stop giving that attention, the difference can be felt without a single word being spoken. Suddenly, the person who was accustomed to receiving your messages notices that the screen is quiet. The person who expected you to ask how their day went realizes that nobody is asking. The person who could always count on your encouragement discovers that your energy has moved somewhere else. It is not necessarily the silence itself that affects them. It is what the silence represents. It represents a boundary. It represents a decision. It represents the moment when someone who was once emotionally available decides that their attention is no longer something they can give away without thought. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening. Your attention was never an unlimited resource. Every conversation you had, every message you answered, every problem you listened to, and every moment you spent worrying about someone required something from you: time, energy, emotional strength. When you constantly give those things away, you can slowly become exhausted without realizing why. You may begin carrying emotions that do not belong to you, while neglecting the emotions that are asking for your own care. So when you disappear, you are not necessarily taking something away from them. You may simply be taking yourself back. There is a difference between withdrawing attention to manipulate someone and withdrawing attention because you have finally learned to protect your peace. One is a game, the other is growth. You do not need to calculate how long to stay silent so that someone misses you. You do not need to post mysterious messages or make sure they know that you are doing better without them. Real growth is much quieter. You simply stop investing where your investment has repeatedly left you empty. And when your attention is gone, they may begin to understand how much they relied on it. Perhaps they relied on your reassurance whenever they doubted themselves. Perhaps they depended on your constant availability whenever they felt lonely. Perhaps they became comfortable knowing that no matter how distant they became, you would eventually return. Your absence removes that certainty. But hear this carefully. You are not responsible for filling another person's emotional emptiness. You can care about someone without becoming their source of constant validation. You can love someone without being available every hour of every day. You can support someone without carrying their entire emotional world on your shoulders. Healthy connection leaves room for two people to exist as whole individuals. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is redirect the attention you have been giving outward. Look at your own dreams again. Listen to your own thoughts. Spend time with people who replenish rather than drain you. Give yourself the patience you so freely offered others. Ask yourself what you need instead of constantly asking what everyone else needs from you. And eventually, something beautiful happens. You stop measuring your worth by how much attention someone gives you, because you have learned to give yourself the attention you were begging to receive. Their silence no longer terrifies you. Their distance no longer controls your mood. Their approval no longer determines your confidence. Your attention becomes precious because you finally understand that your energy is your life in motion. Where you place it matters. Who receives it matters. And most importantly, whether you are leaving enough of it for yourself matters. So let your disappearance be a return, not a return to someone else, but a return to yourself. Let the energy you once spent chasing, proving, explaining, and pleasing become the energy that builds your future. If someone notices your absence, let them notice. If they feel the loss of your attention, let them feel it. But do not turn around simply because they finally noticed what you had been giving them all along. Keep walking toward the life where your attention, your peace, and your heart are treated as something sacred. When you stop making yourself constantly visible, something interesting can happen. People who once knew what you were doing may suddenly know nothing. They no longer hear about your plans, your struggles, your victories, or the little details of your day. You are no longer explaining where you are going or what you are working toward. You become quieter, and that quietness creates curiosity. They begin wondering what is happening in a life they once had easy access to. They may wonder why you stopped sharing everything. They may ask themselves whether you are happier now, whether you have met new people, whether you are working towards something important, or whether you simply decided that your life no longer needs an audience. And sometimes, the less you explain, the more they wonder. Not because you are trying to create mystery, but because you have stopped giving everyone a front row seat to your life. There is tremendous strength in learning that your life does not need constant explanation. You do not have to announce every goal before you accomplish it. You do not have to tell everyone what you are planning. You do not have to document every improvement so that people can see you changing. Some of the most meaningful transformations happen quietly, behind closed doors, when nobody is watching and nobody is applauding. Perhaps you have spent too much of your life explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. Perhaps you shared your dreams with people who only saw limitations. Perhaps you told everyone about your next step before you had even taken it. And slowly, you learned that not every person deserves access to every chapter of your story. Privacy is not secrecy. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes protecting your peace means allowing your life to develop without constant commentary. When you disappear from the noise, you begin hearing yourself again. You start discovering what you actually want instead of what other people expect from you. You began making decisions based on your values rather than their reactions. And that kind of independence can be powerful. People may become curious because they can no longer predict you through your words. But you are not trying to become unpredictable. You are simply becoming less available to unnecessary opinions. Let them wonder. Let them wonder why you are quieter. Let them wonder why you no longer chase conversations. Let them wonder why you stopped proving your worth. Let them wonder what you are building. Let them wonder why you seem different. You do not have to answer every question people have about your transformation. Some answers are meant to be lived rather than explained. There is a beautiful kind of confidence that develops when you no longer need everyone to know what you are doing. You can work in silence and let the results speak. You can heal without announcing every wound. You can grow without asking for permission. You can become stronger without making a declaration. And while other people are wondering what changed, you are busy becoming someone your past self would be proud to meet. But remember, your goal should never be to make people jealous or insecure about your new life. That keeps you emotionally connected to their reaction. Your goal is freedom. You are not building a better life so someone else will regret losing access to you. You are building it because you deserve to experience what becomes possible when your energy is no longer scattered across people, places, and situations that do not serve your growth. One day they may see you and realize that you are not the same person who disappeared. You may be calmer, more focused, more selective, more peaceful. You may smile differently because you no longer carry the need to be understood by everyone. And perhaps they will become curious about how you got there. You do not have to tell them. Sometimes the most powerful answer to curiosity is simply continuing to live well. Let your life become the explanation. Let your peace become the evidence. Let your growth become visible without you having to announce it. And let the people who once had unlimited access to your life understand that when you disappeared, you were not hiding, you were becoming. Sometimes your absence becomes a mirror, and mirrors have a way of showing us what we would rather avoid. When you are no longer there to soften every conversation, forgive every mistake, or explain away every uncomfortable moment, people may begin looking back at their own behavior. They may remember words they said too casually, promises they failed to keep, moments when they dismissed your feelings, and situations where they assumed you would simply stay. Your silence can create the space in which those memories become impossible to ignore. They may replay conversations that once seemed unimportant. They may remember the tone they used with you, the times they interrupted you, the moments they made you feel like you were asking for too much when all you wanted was basic consideration. They may remember how many times you tried to communicate before you finally stopped. And suddenly, the story looks different because you are no longer standing there defending yourself. There is no argument to win and no explanation to dismiss. There is only their memory of what happened. That is one of the strange things about human nature. Sometimes we understand our actions more clearly after the other person stops reacting to them. While you were there, they could focus on your response. They could blame your emotions, question your boundaries, or become distracted by the argument itself. But when you leave the conversation behind, they may finally have to look at what caused the distance in the first place. And perhaps they begin asking themselves uncomfortable questions. Why did I keep treating this person as though they would never leave? Why did I ignore what they were telling me? Why did I assume their patience had no limit? Why did I wait until they became distant before I appreciated their presence? These questions may not be easy, but sometimes discomfort is the beginning of awareness. Yet you must understand something important. You do not need to stay around to witness their realization. You do not need to wait for an apology. You do not need to receive a detailed confession about everything they now understand. If someone recognizes their mistakes after you leave, that is their journey. Your journey is to decide what you will do with what you have learned, because there is a danger in waiting for someone else's self-awareness. You can become trapped in anticipation, checking your phone, wondering whether they have finally realized what they did. You may tell yourself that you are moving on, while secretly hoping they will come back with the perfect words. But freedom begins when their realization is no longer necessary for your healing. Maybe they will understand. Maybe they will not. Maybe they will apologize. Maybe they will defend themselves forever. You cannot control another person's ability to reflect honestly. What you can control is whether you continue allowing the same behavior into your life. Your disappearance should not be an invitation for revenge. It should be an opportunity for clarity. If someone reflects on their actions because you stepped away, let that reflection belong to them. You do not have to guide them through it. You already communicated what mattered when you were present. If they ignored it then, repeating yourself 10 more times will not necessarily make the message clearer. Sometimes people learn the value of respect when access disappears. Sometimes they recognize the consequences of their choices when there is no longer someone standing beside them to absorb those consequences. And sometimes, despite everything, they never learn. That is painful, but it is also freeing. You cannot make another person become self-aware. You can only become aware of what you will and will not accept. So do not disappear, hoping that someone will finally feel guilty. Disappear from the patterns that kept hurting you. Walk away from the conversations that always left you exhausted. Stop participating in cycles where your feelings are repeatedly dismissed and your boundaries repeatedly tested. Let your distance come from wisdom, not bitterness. And if somewhere in that silence They begin questioning their own behavior. Let them. Let them sit with their memories. Let them examine their choices. Let them understand the moments they once dismissed. You do not have to return to help them reach that conclusion. Your responsibility is not to make someone regret losing you. Your responsibility is to make sure you never again lose yourself trying to convince someone to treat you well.